Welcome back to the Marcel vlog. Today I'm going to talk about 9 things that I avoid when mastering. I'm not trying to invalidate the legitimacy of these techniques as mastering tools, but I'm just going to give you some other ideas of how to make these approaches work possibly for you and to help you understand why I took a different tack with my own mastering signal path. So the first thing I want to talk about is EQ notch cuts. This is the first thing that I personally try to avoid when mastering if at all possible. There are times when there's a frequency issue in a specific area where I do a dip or a cut, but in many cases I'd rather go back to the mix engineer and talk to them about that, whether that is an S or whether that is something in the low end or something that's ringing in the mid-range, or just a really painful top-end thing. What I do is take a very forgiving or sympathetic approach in the building of my signal path. And I believe in one thing called subtraction by addition, where if you add very musical frequencies, you're going to have dips or slight cuts by the same token in some of the frequencies that may typically cause problems or muddiness or just bogging down of the track in general, whether that's low end, whether that's just how I EQ the top end. So I've made certain choices that sound better even before I start EQing. So I don't have to go in, I don't find myself going in as I used to be honest. 10 years ago, I was doing all 3 or 4 notches per song and just going in and taking things out. But I decided at some point to try to build a chain that would eliminate or alleviate most of that cutting. And I rarely ever do notch cuts anymore, and my masters get approved overwhelmingly most of the time. So I think you don't have to do this. I want to talk about EQs for 1 second while I'm on this topic. Sometimes a piece of gear can be great and sound great on a mix and even a master, but I didn't choose to use it. And I want to give you an example. And it's not necessarily a cut example. This one's more of a boost example, but I think it'll maybe open your eyes to some of the decisions that I made in building my own signal path. But that EQ was the Better Maker. When I got the Better Maker, I put it in the chain and I started boosting things, and I really liked what I heard, and I still like the sound of that EQ. But I noticed that when it was flat, when I just instantiated it at Unity, that there was a missing deep low end. And that kind of bothered me because I knew every time I used it, I'd have to make up for it. So I made a decision not to put it in my desk, and the rep came over to my studio and listened to it as well, and he heard it, and he kind of got a little concerned because he said, well, a lot of guys are using this in mastering. I said, listen, some people are taking a different approach to mastering, and they're painting. And I'll talk more about that in a second, and how I view mastering more as framing than I do painting. And essentially, we called up some mix engineers. I called up Greg Wells, whose studio at the time was 15 minutes or 5 minutes away from me. And we were over there in 15 minutes, and he fell in love with the Better Maker. We took it to Jimmy Douglas, who was working with Pharrell, and he fell in love with the Better Maker. Took it over to Jason Joshua, and he was working and mixing, and he replaced his bass stem with that. He had Pultex he was using in parallel, which is something I'll also talk about in a minute. And he fell in love with it and parked it on his bass bus, and I believe it's still there with the presets that I brought over for the demo. So the point is, just because I may say I don't like a certain step or I don't like notch cutting, it doesn't mean that I'm diametrically opposed to any notch cutting or choosing certain gear. I'm just helping to try to explain my approach and why I made certain decisions, and maybe it'll affect your thought process, how you approach gear as well. The second thing I avoid when mastering is using multi-band compressors. Again, these can be great tools for mixing or processing individual tracks, and I know that some people have success using them in a mastering chain. I avoid using them in general because I find that the songs sound too processed, overly processed. And again, I'm not painting, and I want to talk about that a little bit more now. I believe that people, when they deliver a mix, they basically have the picture completed. But what they're looking for is a better way to present it, a better frame. I recently bought a frame for a picture that I bought in France. It was a limited run of a print, and I kind of felt like it was special. It wasn't super expensive, but it did cost a little bit. And I said, let's give it a really nice frame. So we took it to the city, and we did the town here in Europe, and we got a nice frame made specifically for it that accents elements, the colors of the artwork itself, the picture, and they asked us what kind of glass do you want, and museum or standard glass, which has more glare and the lighting. And I said, well, you know, the museum glass, right? I'm a mastering guy. I want to put the nice sheen on top. So I treat mastering the same way. I'm not going to go in and do a bunch of multiband compression to your track. I'm going to hope that you have that solved already on the way in, and I'm going to give it a nice frame and a nice finish, a bigger picture. The frames are usually larger than the picture, and the mastering should make your picture look larger and look bigger when it's out there being shown to people. The third thing that I avoid are stereo widening tools. I take a different tack for stereo widening, and the reason is whenever I've implemented these tools before, it kind of destroys that center. And you'll hear me talk a lot about the center of the track. I want to give you one example of what I feel is stereo widening run amok. And I'm going to show you, I'm not going to play the song, but I'm going to stream a song for you here and show you let's see, take a look here. On a sound field meter, the song is called In My World, and it's by Lindsey Buckingham of Fleetwood Mac, and he sings it with Christine McVie. And it's a really nice song, and I'm a big fan of Fleetwood Mac and Lindsey Buckingham. But when I heard this song, while I liked it, I really didn't like what I was hearing in the earbuds and later in the speakers, and I sort of put it up on a meter before I did this presentation because I knew I was going to talk about it. And I want to show you what it looks like on a sound field meter, or kind of a scope. And this shows you where things sit, where the energy sits in the track. So I want you to look at this, and I'm going to play you just the chorus here. I'm going to mute everything else that's going on right now. You're only going to see the meters working. So that's the chorus. And as you can see, everything is scattered about. The song is called In My World. And when you go and listen to it on iTunes or Spotify, you're going to hear that it's just completely spread out. The stereo field is all over the place. I'm going to play you a song that I worked on recently. And I've looked at other tracks from pop artists like Taylor Swift, who her masters sound really good, whoever does them. I know Tom Coyne used to. He did her big last big album, 1989, and that was amazing. The late Tom Coyne, who I was a big fan of. So look at this last track that I'm working on. Look at how the energy is centered around the middle, even though there's width that happens on this track, and you see things get scattered at times because that's kind of the interaction of center and the sides. If I put a bunch of stereo widening on this, it would spread the whole and smear the whole track. So listen to In My World, see if that says anything to you, and if you agree or don't agree, maybe it opens up your eyes to what I'm talking about with excessive stereo widening. The next thing, the fourth thing that I avoid is kind of related to this, which is mid-side processing. Maybe I just don't like the word processing, but I don't like affecting the mids separate from the outside, from the sides of the track, and which is the difference of the mids. It's things that aren't in the center or on the sides, and you can process them differently. And I just don't like this approach because it always kind of rips apart the solidity of the track. What I do, and what they're really trying to do, is give you more center or more side. What I do is link and unlink various different gear, and I have 4 or 5 different things that I can link and unlink in my chain. And if I really want a dead center sounding track, I just link my compressors, link my EQs in the Antelope FPGA, and I get a more centered track. So there are different ways to skin that cat, I feel, and it's just never been a problem for me. It is something I avoid. The other thing that I avoid is number 5, which is parallel processing. Again, a cool tool for mixing. You can blend things. I know it's great for drums. Michael Brower uses this to great effect, and he's definitely a legendary mix engineer. But I find that when I'm mastering, when the whole track is done, now we're talking about a 2-channel highway, or two-lane highway right here, and anything I do really is blown out of proportion by the time you get it loud and by the time everything. I'm known for clean masters that are balanced and pretty loud. We'll talk more about loudness in a second as well, because that's a hot topic right now. But basically, anything I do, so if I introduce a blended sound together with the original, I just find things get a little phase weird and in the mastering stage. So I avoid parallel processing I know some people use it. I don't. The sixth thing I avoid are analog switch boxes. I don't use analog switch boxes in my own chain because I'm happy with the construction and the final stereo image. I'm happy with the frame that I've created based on the order of the gear that's in my signal path. So I don't need them. I don't feel any need for them, and it also allows me to avoid putting something else in the chain, which I talked about in my last vlog about not putting something in that made things better, worse, but only could make it a little bit better. And analog switch boxes just weren't bringing any character for me that I needed to have. However, there's some good ones out there, and people use them to great effect. I like the Manley Backbone. I like the Crockwood stuff. These are things I've heard in other rooms that work. So I don't use them here, but it's just about education. It's a choice, and there's some cool ones out there for sure. The other thing that I avoid and I don't do is DAW bouncing. Now, unless I'm changing something from 24 to 16-bit, I don't do another capture to 16-bit. I've compared bouncing something to 16-bit with a high-quality program. You see me mastering with Logic, but I do all my processing with Studio One. So I create DDP files with Studio One for CDs, and I do things like converting files to different formats in Studio One as well, because I really like how it processes that. There's just something for me comfortable about the sound of Logic when I'm playing and printing. So I'll use different DAWs for different things, but I try to, but always on that main master, and also the streaming masters that I make for my clients, which are adjusted for the algorithms for Spotify and for Tidal. And by the way, there's a great tool called Master Check from Nugent Audio that I highly recommend, and I will talk more about that on other vlogs as well, but that's something I use to create that streaming thing, and I do it live. So I find that just capturing the song live, playback, record it, and not do any additional bouncing on that original file as much as possible, it keeps that master intact. The less processing, the better, if you're noticing a theme. Another thing I avoid, number 8, is de-essers. I almost never de-ess a master unless I'm just have no other options and I can't get the mix engineer to do some more de-essing on their end. I've even had people send me vocals that I de-essed and send back for them, or done stem mastering, which is something I also mostly avoid. I'll do them from time to time, but I mostly avoid stem masters now because I like my 2-channel chain. It accomplishes what I need, and stem mastering is really mixing starting all over again, because once you separate all those stems, you have to you're mixing. So because I'm mastering, I try to focus on 2-channel masters. So I avoid de-essing. However, I'm talking through a de-esser right now that is in beta with Antelope called the Master De-Esser, and it has a parallel knob. It has very powerful tools, and I actually tested it on some mixes, and I do like it. I don't want to go that route unless I absolutely have to. So I'm going to continue to avoid de-essing as much as possible, because you don't just de-ess when you're ducking a frequency, essentially, which is that 5 to 6K typically, depending on if it's a male or female range. And you're ducking that down, you're also pulling the music down in that range that hits as well. And I just try to avoid that. I'd rather do that just in the mix, just on the thing that needs to be de-essed. And another thing, if you have a nice musical sounding chain, you're not going to add harshness. If you're not using harsh EQs, or frankly a lot of plug-in EQs, you're not going to have that accentuated sibilant sound as bad. And you may even like, I did a track that I'm working on right now, or I just finished actually last month, sorry, but I'm going to show you right now. And it is Essie, but it's a pop song, and they sound good, and it tickles the ear in a nice way. So sometimes we're attacking that S kind of without maybe reason all the time, without good cause. The last thing is going to include, and I'm going to do a lot more audio examples in the 10 steps that I do use for mastering, which is my next vlog, but I'm going to give you one sneak peek of some audio here, and I'm going to show you a limiter. I avoid plug-in limiters, and I thought it's a good opportunity to show you why. Now the music's going to get a little loud here because it is going through a mastering chain live, but I want to show you a hardware limiter. And then I have an L2 here, and I'm going to turn this on. I have the identical settings in the L2 plugin as I do the L2 hardware. And I want you to listen to the difference between the two. I'm going to switch back and forth. So we'll start with the hardware, and then we'll go to the plugin. We'll go back. forth a couple times. So this is with the L2 hardware. So if you can hear that difference, it's pretty easy to hear from me. I'm getting a pancaking with the plug-in version of the limiter that isn't in the hardware. For whatever reasons, they say it's the same code, but I actually talked recently to the guy in Israel who built the original hardware, and he believes that because you're not using shared processing, it's dedicated processing just for that algorithm, that of course you're going to get a different sonic result. So it's an ongoing debate and topic with different people who work with DSP, but me as a mastering guy, I avoid plug-in limiters. I love the sound of the hardware limiter. It keeps my whole chain intact. So that's it for this week. If you'd like to have me master some of your music, please go to marceljamesmastering.com. Check out the stuff that I've showed up there. I've got my gear. I'll be posting these videos in a new tab coming soon, so you can kind of, they'll be indexed up there. If you go to the contact page, fill it out, send me a link to the song you want me to master, or just ask a question. I would love to hear from you. So thanks a lot for tuning in. See you next time.